Hello, welcome to episode 10, Clearing Out Contention. Creating space for peace. Having any form of contention in our lives can be super painful. A thoughtless neighbor, an argumentative sibling, a disagreeable coworker, etc. These circumstances, they really start to infringe on our happiness because they take the mind's focus away from how beautiful and fun and interesting life is, and it causes us to be focused on the contention. We start getting a little bit of tunnel vision. And it is a survival strategy for the brain to pay extra attention to conflict. So our brains aren't stupid, it's just that it can become counterproductive really fast. In the not too distant past, contention between a neighboring tribe, or other countries, it could mean death. And if you insulted someone, you might even be challenged to a duel. I mean, conflict used to be very dangerous. Most of us now, we don't live in that kind of immediate threat, but our brains are still wired to look for threat. And when someone's fighting with us, we get flooded as if it's life or death. And unfortunately, some people really do still live in unsafe situations where, like military conflict, for example, could literally lead to death. And I pray for anyone who's in an unsafe situation that the violence will end and that they'll find a way to leave. And for most of us, the day-to-day stuff is no longer lethal. Unless obviously you're living in a war zone or something like that. However, our brains are still sometimes primed to respond to even relatively minor stressors, like arguing with a partner with a lot of adrenaline, and we go into that fight or flight response, which leads to anxiety and unhappiness. So maybe the threat level is low, but our body doesn't know that. So here's some ways I found to cope with contention. Obviously, avoiding all unnecessary contention whenever possible, like arguing or fighting with other people. It can definitely affect our peace of mind. So whenever we can choose to not argue with someone, like not arguing with a troll on Facebook, that's really low-hanging fruit, because the truth is you were never going to get any benefit from that, no matter how it turned out anyway. So arguing with a stranger or someone that you rarely have any interaction with is usually all risk and no reward. So not taking the bait and getting into some kind of contentious back and forth with like an in-law you only see a few times a year because they made some absurd political comment, that's an obvious one. Because sometimes there's nothing, we can do about someone else's internal drama, and they might be being completely unreasonable and projecting things onto us. And at that point, we just have to decide, is this a situation where I can just walk away and wish them well, or do I have to stay and engage? My rule of thumb is just to completely avoid all unnecessary conflict with people who don't matter to me that much, because it's all risk and no reward. If they don't matter a lot to me and I'm not forced to spend a lot of time with them, then there's no reason for me to let my pride convince me that I'm sticking up for my principles. I have to say something, get all embroiled in the conflict, when in fact I'm just having a pointless stress generating conversation that's going to lead nowhere productive and will definitely diminish my peace. And then lastly, if you're having a conflict with someone that you do care about having a functioning relationship with, like a family member, a coworker, if it's something where like the discussion just has to be had because it is a decision that needs to be made and it's a sensitive topic and it feels contentious, then in those cases we do our best to get into the habit of reminding ourselves when we're feeling that fight or flight that they're not the enemy. And that might sound obvious, but our brains do tend to immediately categorize even people we love and deeply care about as our enemies once we start getting that adrenaline and that start feeling flooded. And then now suddenly we're trying to hurt someone who's actually precious to us. We're trying to hurt someone or sling verbal insults at someone who's important, and we're stinging their hearts with our words. So in those cases, it's really important that we remind ourselves that conflict can have lasting consequences on their mental health too, not just yours. It's painful. It's really painful for a child, a romantic partner, really for anyone who you care about, to feel like you might abandon them emotionally or even physically during conflict. And that's, even if it's not realistic, we can feel that way. We all can get so flooded with emotion during conflict because our minds panic and they do assume the worst. So we take a deep breath. We listen. We let them be vulnerable. The goal is to become a safe person to speak to. And that looks like asking a lot of questions, listening more than you speak. There's really no downside to listening more than you speak, because the other person is going to feel heard and they'll calm down faster. And then they're going to be more receptive to your perspective, not less. Being a good listener doesn't mean you're losing the fight. It's actually making your odds better of getting your point heard. It is difficult to develop the ability to stay really calm and listen when your heart is hurting or your pride feels wounded. Yeah, it's hard. It can be really hard. But when you commit to practicing it, you get better and better. And if you slip, you don't beat yourself up, you get back on the horse. But once you've mastered that skill, you're going to be a rare and precious gem among the human species. And I promise you that people will respect you more, not less. And you'll get your way more, not less, if you're a great listener. A great empathetic listener who really cares about other people. People feel that and they're going to reciprocate. And here's probably one of the best pieces of advice I could ever give to anyone to up-level their maturity and personal power really quickly. Here it is. Stop needing the last word. Let it go. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Beck Sato. I'll see you soon. Love you.